our today's discussion, and in our discussion we intend to talk about a book called Song of LAWINO. Now, one of the most interesting books that which I've ever read in literature is Song of LAWINO, and because this book brings a message home, it begins to contextualize Africanism of an African and Westernization of Western into place. This book is written by Oct Pipitek. This writer is from Uganda, and he chooses to write under the traditions of the people of the Akori in Uganda. Now, initially this book is written as the social and political commentaries, and yet these social and political commentaries are not only in direct interest of the people of Uganda, the Akori people, but it also shows us that these problems are almost everywhere in Africa. Now, in this book we have three main characters, and those are Oko, who is the protagonist, or who is the main character in this book, and we have LAWINO and Clementine. Now, LAWINO and Clementine, these are cohorts in competing for love for Oko. One thing also that we see is that much as we may want to discover what is in this book is written as a poem, and yet it has 13 sections, but with these sections, when you begin to read, it comes out more of a story. Okay? And now, why should it come more as a story? You should begin to realize that this book brings forth the element of LAWINO as a representation of the uneducated Africans. And also LAWINO should be taken and treated as a wife in a home. And Oko should be treated as the educated or the bourgeoisies of this world, and also as a husband to LAWINO. And at the same time, we should also see Clementine, who should treat as a girlfriend to Oko, and yet LAWINO in her words, she calls her as the woman with whom I share my husband with. So trying to give us now a concept there that in the African context, there is no offense in one being a polygamous man. So this is why LAWINO does not get bothered. She simply says, the woman with whom I share my husband with. So the implication here is that in the African context, a man can marry as many women as he can, and a woman should not take offense in such an element. So this book brings a lot of social, economic, political, and moral aspects of Africans. In its entirety, it tries to bring about, the Africanism of an African. Now, there are 6 themes in this book, which, of course, I'm interested to discuss all of them. The first theme that which we get in contact with is a theme of political and social problems of the Akori people of Uganda and the whole Africa. Not only social and political problems in Uganda, but these are also common in Africa. Okay? Number 2 is a concept of the critical form of westernization of Africans and the blatant idiotization of true Africanism. So, this theme explores how westernization has robbed Africa of its Africanism. And also we see how blatant so westernization is in idiotizing true Africanism. Number 3, we see the keen interest of restoration of Africanism by stupidizing westernization. So LAWINO gets on to show interest of restoring the true Africanism of Africa by making sure that she has gone on to stupidize westernization. And the 4th theme is that these poems, of course, are a way in which most African nations developed and lived after independence. So it shows the independence of Africanism of Africans. The 5th theme is the evil of westernization. The book begins to explore the evils of westernization, how we see clearly here what westernization has done to many Africans. And the 6th one is the need to be an African. There's a critical need that which LAWINO has portrayed here of becoming a true African. So, in essence, what do we see in these poems? In the poems, Oct has tried to show the first political leaders in Africa and how they made many mistakes, that they had, become bosses even after sending the colonial masters who were viewed as bosses to Africans. So they also just occupied the offices simply to begin to borrow the manners of them that which ruled Africa at that time. Who the colonial masters that which we fought, they also became African colonial masters. So these political leaders were educated by missionaries, while colonial governments was in power and were strongly influenced by their missionary training to ignore and destroy African culture and impose, European culture. This is one element that which we see. Education does not mainly change people in Africa. I want to believe that education in Africa changes itself. It does not change an African. Because when we learn, instead of becoming true Africans, we become the colonial masters of Africa because we fail to live up to what the education provides. To some extent, I feel that the Western education that which we have received has not done any good to us because it has destroyed us instead, because we do not want to live in our own cultural systems. We want, of course, to dash out or throw out whatever which we have as Africans and begin to live like the Western worlds. So the people who had been educated in Britain became owners of the large farms and directors of the big companies and became ministers in the government. These new officers, office bearers, kept the colonial system through which such men were all paid while their workers and peasants remained poor. I think that's a common thing here. So instead of trying to build upon the ways of life that existed before the colonial powers came to Africa, they expected the ways of life that the colonialists had forced upon Africans and tried to build new African nations out of them. This is one element also that which we see. So the colonial government wanted to train people to understand the political systems of the colonial government so that they would be able to replace the white man with that system. So in that way, the change over that time of independence would become very small because there was not much change in terms of mannerisms of the colonial masters and them that which were educated at that time, who became also leaders of African nations. So these problems, they are common in all African nations. So in many African countries, there is more or less what happened when independence came. It is these historical events which are the cause of family dispute between LAWINO and Oko. So the two characters, in principle, LAWINO and Oko, should not be regarded as the individuals, but as the symbols of representations which represents the particular group of people, like I have said earlier on. LAWINO in this case represents the poor Africans, okay? The peasant Africans, the uneducated Africans, while Oko represents the bourgeoisies, the rich Africans who are educated, who are taught after the manners of the white people, who have sold their cultures and who have no regard for them. So the argument should be seen as an argument between a representation of the groups, like we've put it forth. So the poems are a struggle between those who are at the moment the most numerous, that is a poor peasant who do not have a say in the political decision making. Now, what are some of the imageries that which we see? Maybe before we move to imageries, I would want to quickly bring you to speed that the whole section, 13 sections of this poem, they are about, a setup where it's a marriage where LAWINO and Oko are husband and wife. And this family has lived in a serious contestation, in serious disputes, where the wife and the husband have never agreed on anything. All the time they have kept on arguing on various issues that ranges from social, economic, political, and much more to do with civilization. Okay? Now, what images do we see here and symbolism? Oct Pipitek uses images or imageries, and in turn these images are used as symbols. Number one of them, he talks about a spear, which symbolizes the manhood because of its importance in the manly task of hunting and battle, and because of its sexual meaning as a symbol for the penis or manhood. The other symbol, so that which we see, or the imagery, is that of the bull. And the poem is a symbol of the strength and the courage in terms of reverence. So these are just one of the few of the symbols that we can talk about. May I also just bring to you one of the symbols that have been used. The symbol of the rock which is a symbol of virginity. Okay? Oct Pipitek has used the rock as a symbol of virginity or of a woman who is intact, who has never known a man. So that is how we begin to see this. Let me get into some of the intricacies at which we need to know. Song of LAWINO also is a book that is written in serious sarcasm. Okay? Octpipitek has managed to use the social context in bringing, serious sarcasm that would have never found its place, if it was not for the social context and the social purpose as he begins to portray it in the life of Oko and LAWINO. So, in all purpose and essence, what we begin to see is how Octpipitek uses sarcasm as a way in which to portray the lifestyle of these two individuals. But we know very well that in Africa, insults are rare. Much of what which we hear and see is the praises and just the freedom to speak in however one wishes to speak. So there are 13 sections. Let me just begin to bring you to speed because I may not manage to run through all the sections. In the quarrels that which LAWINO and Oko have, LAWINO has accused her husband Oko that his tongue is bitter, to an extent of comparing the bitterness of the tongue to the penis of the bee. Okay? Why? Oko is educated and LAWINO is uneducated. And because Oko is educated, he looks down upon LAWINO and begins to think that, she's a shallow-minded person. She does not think so well. So Oko is completely contemptuous of LAWINO's lack of schooling, that she is reacting to Oko by mocking him. Okay? So in many ways she has gone to mock him. LAWINO also has talked about the woman with whom I share my husband with. She has here portrayed the true Africanism of a woman. She has not taken offense in Oko's relationship with Clementine. However, to a larger extent, we see that she is bitterly bitter about Clementine. And she thinks that Clementine has a lot of advantages more than herself, because she is portrayed as one who knows how to take baths, one, of course, who knows how to apply body lotion, and one, of course, who knows how to make herself look as modern as she would become. But yet she has also used, Clementine as a symbol to talk about how many African women have wasted themselves in trying to change themselves and look like the Western woman or the white person. So she takes, on in many ways on Clementine, as she matches to idiotize her and stupidify her in her nature of dress, her nature of skin texture and many more others. Also, LAWINO talks about, the dances of the white people. She expresses how, many white, or Western dances are so evil, such as ball dance, where, people would touch each other, even without much restrictions. And she gets on to talk about African dances that are so meaningful, which are morally moral. And of course, she has talked about, the Western dances, which she feels they are the most immoral kind of dances because they encourage people to embrace in public and ignore the rules of the respect for relatives. Okay? She also says that Western dances are dirty and silly because they are danced in smoky atmospheres of crowded halls where no one can be comfortable or relaxed. So she has gone on, to make mention of how so stupidified Western dances are. She also talks about how she was so beautiful in her early years. Okay? She falls into what I would refer to as nostalgic sentimentations. LAWINO begins to remember and recalls how so beautiful she was and skillful when she was, younger and admired by all the boys because of her singing and dancing. She talks about the Africanism of a woman, how so natural she was, how so beautiful, how so cunning, how so, stunning she was when Oko used to propose her. I've also learned one lesson here that, men oftentimes when they want to find their way in between a woman, they will behave, in strange ways, okay? They will do sometimes, certain things that which they may be thought that are genuine. But there are very few men that, of course, would match the concept and would match the principle of genuineness. Men of whom, they are liars and they do not mean what they say. Okay? All what they may simply just want is to have access in between the pants of a woman. And once they do so, then they are satisfied and they are gone. She tells, us angrily how Oko now condemns her inability to dance in the Western way. Then she turns and speaks with mockery about Oko's incompetence in all Akori games. So in other words, LAWINO here gets into a gracious nostalgic state where she begins to think of how Oko would sleep on his thighs. Okay? How Oko would lean on her. How Oko would admire her. How Oko would simply show that she was the only woman on earth, and yet Oko did not mean, because it has proven itself that this time around Oko thinks that this woman is illiterate. Okay? She does not know even letter A. LAWINO also gives us a picture of how many African women have wasted themselves in much activities that which they do so as to make themselves become more like Western women. And under the section which is called the gracious giraffe cannot become a monkey. No matter how much a giraffe would try herself or itself to change from a giraffe to a monkey, it will never become. So in this section, she mocks and makes funny of the pain and the effort that African girls go through to straighten their hair, to change the complexion of the skin. And LAWINO condemns the hair straightening and the wearing of handkerchiefs as dirty, and calls them the wearing of wigs as witchcraft. Okay? And we have seen obvious today that many women, they have tried, by all means to wear, the human hair, to wear extensions, to wear, whatever it is that they can, simply to look like a white woman. And that level is this time called the classy. Okay? And every woman thinks that when they wear those wigs, when they wear those extensions, they become, so, stunning. And they reach, the extent where they can look, to be so special in the community. According to LAWINO, she says, don't waste yourself as an African woman. Be natural. Okay? Use your kinky hair. Beautify yourself in your natural state. There is no evil in remaining who you are and in staying what you are. And there is no truth in knowing that when you wear wigs, when you bleach your skin, when you wear cosmetics, when you wear perfumes and all that, that's when you look, those are ephemeral fancies. They are just there, they are not everlasting, they end. Okay? LAWINO also takes us, to the concept of the time. Okay? Where she talks about a mother stone has a harrow stomach, where she's talking about, how cooking is done, how so respectful the cooking habits of an African woman are, where they cannot stand, and cook on a stove disrespectively. Okay, she talks about the tasteless foods that are kept in the fridges and all that. She advocates for the community, going back to the true Africanism of an African, where you eat, cucumbers that are dried, where you add with groundnuts, where you eat, pumpkin leaves, and where, you cook using clay pots. The simplicity of being simple is the element that which she tries to bring out in this case. She also talks about, there's no fixed time for breastfeeding. This is the concept of time. In Africa, we have a way in which we name times and seasons. Okay? And oftentimes when a child is born, he's not born in a year. They are born referred to the major event that may have taken place in the year when the child was born. And that's how Africans remember the times when great things happen. She confesses she cannot tell the time of the day in Western way. In Africa, we know that when your shadow is in between or under you, you realize that it's noon time. Okay? And of course, the special events and activities that happen around, they tell us of what time is. And in that way, we begin to live and, begin to talk about time. I am ignorant of the good word in the clean book. Here she begins to express ignorance of, Protestantism. She begins to show ignorance of the gospel and the Bible. Okay? She mocks also the missionary teachers who treated African, convents, with a lot of respect and yet despise those that seem not to understand this concept. LAWINO uses the experience of her sister Elena and herself to try to show what she thinks about the missionary and what wrong they did. Protestant made Africans to work like servants while they did none of the work in their own houses, and not even to share their food with the girls who they had employed as maids in their homes. So she begins to wonder, why the Africans who were converted, okay, behaved like this. She also begins to think, how many pupils, were put, in classes, how they were educated, and how they were barred, from living boys and girls together, but yet, put in separate places. The issue of sex schools, where girls, go to their own school and boys also go to their own school. And she wonders, how meaningless the Christian education is. Because she wants us to say, when you keep the girls like that, when still they meet, the fire that which burns in them, it will be rekindled, and they will begin to do the same things that which they are refused to do when they are taken, into sex schools. From which mouth of the river? Here, LAWINO begins to cry and complain and ask so many difficult questions. Some of the questions that she asks are called cosmological questions. She questions, and she begins to show ignorance and pretends as though she does not know God. She says, the hatchback, calling God and referring to him as a hatchback. And also, she begins to wonder how it so happened that Jesus Christ was born through Mary the Virgin. Because what she understands is that when a young man sits, with a woman, and when their breasts have emerged, and when they meet at that moment, of course, fire, begin burning. And when a young man, lays on top of the woman, of course, she'll get pregnant, and that, life begins to move like that. So she uses a long image of a potter modeling things with clay and asks a series of questions about a source of clay and how the potter can begin to mold himself and the things about himself. And where was he standing when he created all these things? So those are the questions that she asks. She goes on to talk about many more serious things, such as the buffaloes of poverty knocks the people down. She begins to attack politics, how people would lose, morals, that even brothers, would begin fighting because of politics, and because there is money in politics, and people want just to have a way in which to access the monies. So they would go on insulting each other, and these are what she calls the buffaloes of poverty. They knock people down. Okay? So in essence, there are so many lessons that I've learned in this book. One of them is, though this poem is about social and political life, because the setup is about a homestead where we have a husband and a wife. I want to begin to outline 4 lessons that I've learned of LAWINO. Number 1, LAWINO has exhibited the true Africanism of a woman, because Oko has become contemptuous. He has insulted her in many ways. He has not only insulted her, he has also insulted her relatives, and he has spoken ill. Oko has become contemptuous to the core, but yet this woman has not in any way given up on Oko. She still loves him, and she still believes that a home must be kept by a woman and not a man. Every serious home, for sure, is kept by a woman. A woman can decide either to break a home or to build it. No matter how silly a man would be, if a woman is normal, the home will always stand forever. But when a woman is not normal, it is easy to break the home. And LAWINO here has exhibited it to us that she would have left Oko based on the issues that he has, raised concerning herself, concerning her relatives, concerning her community, concerning her compound, and whatever represents LAWINO. But yet LAWINO is still hopeful that the husband will change. Every woman must hope to help the husband to see, how best he can become in his life. And LAWINO has hoped, that something must be done about Oko. Obviously, he should be taken to the ancestors, where they'll sit down and begin to teach him manners, to teach him customs, to teach him, the principle of him becoming a man in a home. And she is still hopeful that if the relatives, if the elders of the community are talked to, and they are told about Oko, he will change instead of himself, closing himself in the forest of books where he will just be reading and, become like a monument. She thinks there is much to be done, and she has not given up on him. So every woman in Africa should become, to normality, to realize that a home is made by a woman and a home is never made by a man, because the woman is the owner of the house. Thank you so much.